It truly feels like Canada could be on the verge of permanent change. Talk about Western separation has now reached the steps of the Alberta legislature. Hundreds of people gathered there calling for independence, while Indigenous groups showed up to oppose the movement. Sadly, many say it has been like this for years. Nothing ever changes. And with Carney in power, some believe things could become even worse. They feel there may be no other option left. Many supporters insist they genuinely don't see any alternative to the path they're taking now. At the same time, some say they still want to stay hopeful because they believe this movement could bring something positive. Right now Canada appears to be standing on the edge of a massive political crisis, as several Western provinces have begun pushing toward what some describe as a move toward 51st state-style independence, sending shockwaves across the country. Frustration built over decades is erupting across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, and even the Yukon, with growing calls for separation. The nation is facing serious political tension, and Ottawa's authority seems to be weakening as provincial resistance grows stronger. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has repeatedly floated ideas about expanding the United States and even suggested the possibility of Canada becoming the 51st state. Watching Canada appear to divide in real time is unsettling for many observers. The Western provinces are no longer quietly complaining. They are now openly discussing independence or even the possibility of joining the United States. Some commentators say the situation feels unprecedented. They point to Mark Carney's heated appearances on television, where he appeared frustrated, raising his voice and lecturing Western leaders. For critics, those moments weren't just awkward, they were signs of panic as separatist conversations intensified. Some analysts argue that disruption, upheaval, and political shock are sometimes the only ways major change happens. At the same time, First Nations leaders across Alberta and Saskatchewan have warned that proposed policies may violate treaty rights and Indigenous sovereignty. Public opinion numbers are striking. Surveys suggest around 65% of Albertans, 61% of Saskatchewan residents, and 58% of Manitobans are at least open to serious action regarding separation. During a rally in Edmonton, the sound of chants echoed off the stone walls of the Alberta legislature as hundreds gathered to protest federal policies. Many protesters argued that the West has long been dominated by politicians and policies coming from Eastern Canada. Supporters say this movement is no longer a fringe idea. They describe it as a massive political wave crashing toward Ottawa. Anyone who dismisses it, they say, is either ignoring reality or deliberately misleading people. For decades, the idea often called Wexit, referring to Western provinces separating from Canada, was treated as a fringe political concept. But that perception is rapidly changing. Critics argue that federal policies over the years helped create this situation. Warnings from Western leaders were ignored, pipelines were blocked, regulations were imposed, and many believe wealth generated in the West was redirected east. Residents say they were expected to accept the situation quietly and be thankful for what little returned. Some also complain that strict regulations and federal rules are disrupting everyday life, while taxes continue to rise. Polls conducted before recent elections showed about 30% of Albertans would support separation from Canada. However, not everyone agrees. Some residents strongly oppose the idea of becoming part of the United States and say they remain proud Canadians. Still, critics argue Alberta and Saskatchewan send billions of dollars to Ottawa while receiving far less in return. Eventually, they say, patience runs out. That frustration appears to be boiling over now. Many in the West feel ignored, exploited, and deeply angry. For them, the issue is no longer about ideology, it's about economic survival. An Alberta separatist organization attempting to push forward a referendum question has been told to revise its proposal. Meanwhile, the province is introducing changes to election laws and citizen petition rules that could affect how referendums are organized. The Alberta Prosperity Project had proposed asking voters whether Alberta should become a sovereign nation and leave Canada. Officials say the question in its current form cannot proceed, though other petitions are moving forward. Some political leaders say Alberta has reached a breaking point and is finished negotiating policies they view as failures. Bill proposals under discussion are being described as more than legislation, they are seen as declarations of autonomy. Some analysts say these legal changes are designed to allow the province to operate independently if cooperation with Ottawa breaks down. Supporters argue they are no longer waiting for permission. And large numbers of citizens appear to be backing them. More than 450,000 signatures have reportedly been gathered supporting a separation referendum. For many observers, the discussion has shifted from, should the West leave Canada, to, when could it happen? Some even argue that joining the United States is no longer an unrealistic fantasy but a possible economic strategy. Supporters claim it could offer larger markets, fewer regulations, and greater control over local industries. Legal experts note that if provinces declared independence and gained international recognition while Ottawa lost control, they could effectively become independent states under international law. The movement continues spreading across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, and the Yukon. Supporters say they are finished waiting and are now building legal structures, gathering signatures, and mobilizing voters. Many believe Ottawa has no clear plan to stop the momentum without appearing politically weak. The pressure continues building, and the consequences could be severe for the federal government. Western leaders say they are no longer willing to play by the old political rules. For the first time, a potential timeline is being discussed, with some proposals suggesting the next 12 to 18 months could determine the West's political future. Saskatchewan, often seen as quiet politically, is now becoming one of the strongest voices in the movement. The province produces massive amounts of wheat, canola, uranium, and potash, yet many residents feel Ottawa has ignored its economic importance. They argue that pipeline blocks, rising taxes, and distant federal policies have pushed the prairie region to its breaking point. Outside the Alberta legislature, demonstrators continue demanding separation. Political commentators say these protests give the movement far more credibility than it has ever had before. Governments in the region are now discussing real legal frameworks that could make separation possible. Citizens say they have watched years of mismanagement, weak infrastructure, and economic exploitation. Public opinion suggests growing numbers now support either independence or closer integration with the United States. For many people, the debate has shifted from emotional arguments to practical economic calculations. If Ottawa cannot manage the country effectively, some ask, why remain part of it? Western voters have long complained their voices are ignored in national politics. The term Western alienation is frequently used to describe this feeling of exclusion. Recent federal policies targeting resource industries have only intensified that sentiment. Manitoba faces a particularly complex situation geographically. If Alberta and Saskatchewan separated or joined the United States, Manitoba could find itself physically isolated from the rest of Canada. That could force difficult choices about its own political future. The province might need to negotiate with newly independent neighbors or consider joining them. Energy exports, mining development, and industrial growth are all part of the discussion shaping Manitoba's economic future. Meanwhile, frustration over hydroelectric policies, infrastructure challenges, and economic issues continues growing. Surveys suggest around 58% of Manitobans are open to exploring independence or U.S. statehood. Some longtime workers in the oil industry say they are tired of seeing wealth taken from Western regions without fair returns. British Columbia adds another layer of complexity to the political drama. Interior regions often support pipelines and industrial development, while coastal areas worry about economic instability and environmental impact. Indigenous nations and provincial leaders are increasingly demanding real authority over land and resources. At the same time, some businesses are relocating from Vancouver to interior cities as economic pressures reshape the province. Legal disputes in the Yukon over land management rights have also raised tensions between territorial governments and Ottawa. The Yukon has long been treated primarily as a tourism destination, but that perception is beginning to change. Regional leaders across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia are now proposing detailed plans for governance. These include ideas for provisional governments, control over taxation, law enforcement, and infrastructure. Indigenous governments are also asserting stronger claims for self-governance and autonomy. Even though the Yukon has a small population, its political symbolism is significant. If a small territory can challenge federal authority over land and resources, larger provinces may feel empowered to do the same. Critics argue that Ottawa has never truly prioritized the West. Some residents blame previous leadership for worsening the divide. Meanwhile, Quebec is quietly observing the turmoil and considering its own strategic position. Analysts say the province may use Western unrest as leverage for its long-standing sovereignty ambitions. Media outlets are closely watching the situation and warning that ignoring Quebec's interests could create further instability. Some experts believe certain protest tactics attract attention but may not lead to lasting political change. However, others point out that Canadian national pride is also growing in response to the crisis. Billboards and political messaging referencing Alberta potentially joining the United States have appeared in high-visibility locations. The debate intensified after Donald Trump publicly mentioned the possibility of Canada becoming the 51st state. While some Canadians dismiss the idea, others believe the country needs a major political reset. Historically, nearly half of Quebec voters once supported leaving Canada in a referendum. Combined with today's Western tensions, Ottawa now faces challenges on multiple fronts. Observers describe the situation as a political perfect storm. At its core, the debate is not just ideological, it is economic. Oil remains Canada's most valuable export, making Western provinces economically crucial. And then there is Mark Carney. Critics say his public reactions have looked increasingly strained as the crisis grows. They argue that lecturing provinces with economic statistics will not stop the momentum behind separatist movements. Federal claims about Indigenous veto powers over certain lands are also facing legal scrutiny. Emergency meetings meant to calm tensions have reportedly failed because some provinces refuse to participate. Public polls, petitions, and demonstrations suggest the movement is larger than many expected. Supporters say it represents a coordinated political push, not a temporary protest. The idea of a potential 51st state has shifted the national conversation about Canada's future. Observers who have followed Western politics for decades say separation now feels less fringe than before. Watching events unfold has left many people both fascinated and concerned. Saskatchewan and Manitoba appear increasingly willing to act, while British Columbia and the Yukon continue pushing their own initiatives. Quebec is monitoring the situation carefully as Ottawa struggles to maintain control. Some analysts say Carney's frustration is merely a symptom of a deeper structural problem within Canada's federation. Western provinces now appear organized politically, legally, and economically. Meanwhile, the federal government is scrambling to respond. Officials argue that certain referendum questions could be ruled invalid if they fall outside provincial jurisdiction. Still, economic realities remain powerful. Western provinces produce enormous wealth through oil, agriculture, and mineral resources. Much of that wealth flows east while regulations come from Ottawa. For many residents, the discussion has shifted toward practical political independence. Supporters say joining the United States could offer larger markets and currency stability. However, national polling shows a strong majority of Canadians still oppose becoming a U.S. state. Canada's Supreme Court has ruled that if a province votes clearly for separation, the federal government must negotiate. Economic models suggest some Western regions could grow significantly if they controlled their own resources. Frustration with taxes, regulations, and federal policies continues fueling the debate. Grassroots political movements are growing rapidly across the region. Petitions, social media campaigns, and community activism are transforming frustration into organized action. Young professionals and families alike are calculating how these changes might affect their futures. Town halls and local meetings are now packed with citizens demanding answers. The message from many Western communities is simple: if Ottawa will not change, they will. With possible referendums discussed for the coming years, the timeline for major political decisions may already be forming. Canada now faces a defining question about its future. Will the Federation hold together, or will the idea of new states reshape the map of North America?